Ponce. He's from Mexico, but also based in the US. He's the Chief Research Officer of the World Justice Project. He joined the World Justice Project as senior economist and is one of the original designers and a lead author of the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index. We all know that index is very famous and very cited everywhere. So, and it has been launched a new edition this week. So thank you, Alejandro, for being here, even when you are in your, I think, busiest week of your year. So prior to joining the World Justice Project, Alejandro worked as a researcher at Yale University and as an economist in the World Bank and in the Mexican Banking and Security Commission. So I am very grateful to the three of you for being part of this panel. So just for the sake of time, we will have this introduction, then I will ask questions to the panelists. They will have some minutes to answer each of the three questions that I proposed. And then we will have questions and answer time. I think as we are expecting some number of participants, you can ask the questions in the chat and Ana Sofia is going to read them and we can answer. You can just ask to any of the panelists or just general questions, and we will try to do our best to answer them. So let me start by saying that the Crime and Justice chapter is integrated in the state of open data, and at the time we try to focus our research on the amount of data that has been published in public institutions. This is not the first research we conducted on the topic, but the first research was based in Latin American experiences, and we tried in this chapter to expand the scope of the research to make it more global. So what we could discover through our research is that in most regions, or in some of the regions, particularly we can say Latin America, Asia, Africa, we have the same issues, the same problems, barriers, and some similar conclusions that could be identified as the most important conclusions regarding open data. So what we first did is we tried to summarize the early experiences of promoting publication of open data, and we could identify one of the first one. It was the Chicago crime that is from 2005. Maybe there are some even earlier examples, but this was maybe the first. It was a crime map of the Chicago city. And then we began identifying other more structured experiences of open data in the US, one data police in the UK. And then later, we can also identify more structured and more systematic efforts to opening up data. For example, in 2016, we created the Open Data Portal, Open Judicial Data Portal in Argentina, who is still running and updated. We also have the e-courts example in India, which is a very interesting example because it has open data and semi-open data, I would say, but it's updated almost every day. So these are just examples of early adoption, I can say, in terms of the development of the open data environment which is very young. But these are some examples that has almost more than 5 years, maybe some of them 10 years running. So we said that open data in crime and justice is expected to play a role in measuring and delivering progress in terms of social and economic development. This is something that we believe, and this is because we identify some uses of data that are very important for economic and social development. So in first place, we use data to promote judicial institutions' transparency and accountability through civic monitoring. So crime and justice institutions have historically been seen as opaque, detached from social influence. However, these institutions take action and make decisions that should really not be considered any differently from other public institutions. We also believe that greater levels of open data from the judiciary can help the system become more efficient. Open data should inform judicial public policy. While at present policies are often designed from the top down and can result in poor quality services, the use of open data to build sound judicial policies through analysis and citizen participation is also another important use of data. Thanks to the World Justice Project that has calculated the justice gap, we now know that 1.5 billion people in the world have problems that the justice system cannot solve. This is a lack of problems accessing justice, right? So having more efficient and people-centered justice system will impact in decreasing the gap, this justice gap. And we believe that data can help decrease or narrow this justice gap. So we provided some conclusions in the report. One of them was that there are many barriers to opening up data. Some of the barriers are traditional cultural and political forces against opening up data. Also the lack of adequate financial and human resources. Some countries and jurisdictions may have inadequate or restrictive legal frameworks, including those that prevent to publish data from judicial cases. There is also a weak coordination among the various public institutions producing that data. There is a lack of consistent standards around the production and publishing of judicial data inside the different institutions within a country, but also among different countries, so you can't really compare in some cases. There is also some weak expertise from civil society and other actors, intermediaries and final users of data. So these are some barriers that we identify that were common mostly everywhere. But we could say that an enabling environment was emerging for the spread of open data in crime and justice institutions. International organizations and governments have begun to consider crime and justice data as a raw material to use in implementing and evaluating public policies. If we see the commitments in the action plans in the Open Government Partnership, we can see that there were more and more commitments related to open data in the justice sector. So the update that of the crime and justice chapter that we present today shows that some of the problems we identified in 2018 are still present, and some of them have even worsened due to the pandemic. The pandemic concentrated human and financial resources on health issues as it should be, but also has some new problems for the justice sector. But nevertheless, we can say that some progress has been made in, for example, the adoption of more digital justice tools that can lead to the production of more automatic data. One example of this is the map of open data portals that we have developed with the International Network for Open Justice. In Spanish, we have the name, we know it as RIJA. RIJA is a new network of people working on open justice. We created RIJA in 2020, and one of the first products of the network was this mapping of open data portals. It's only for Latin America, but can show you that from this research that we have conducted in 2019 to now, we have grew a lot in terms of the availability of data that justice institutions are offering the public, but still it shows that there are no standards for publishing data. So we have, I invite you to explore the portal. You can see that there are many dots in the map. So each dot is at least a database that is published, but we have very different models, very different ways of publication formats. So standard, the lack or weak standards for publishing data is still a problem. So other problem that we see is that, or other, not problem, other trend that we see is that CSOs and judicial institutions are more interested now in open justice and in open judicial data. An example, evidence of is the creation of RIJA, and we have more than 200 members, active members from different countries. So I think that this is a progress that we have made in terms of the promotion of open data. As a result of the interest by justice institutions and practitioners and organizations to foster the implementation of open data values, in later years, the attention of academics and practitioners turn towards the possibility that this amount of data that is now available can bring up the use of artificial intelligence to increase the efficiency of the delivery of justice. There is artificial intelligence is strongly influencing the policy and academic debate, and open data advocacy organizations are adapting their agendas in order to take hold of this new scenario. So in which the availability of structured data in open format is fundamental for developing artificial intelligence. However, regarding crime and justice, these changes have led to some resistance from judicial institutions, and it is not widespread. So there is still a lot of work to do to implement these machine learning tools within the justice system for many reasons, not only because of the resistance or the lack of knowledge of judicial institutions, but also regarding some ethical questions or issues that we still need to solve and to figure out why and in which cases we need to implement this kind of machine learning tools for improving the service delivery. So just to give some time for the other panelists, so each one has, I'm sure, very interesting things to say and to reflect upon the chapter, the update of the chapter, and to my words and to your questions. I will just ask 3 questions and ask each panelist to answer them in 5 minutes. So the first questions or topic that I will kindly ask the panelists to reflect is which are the most important advantages of opening up data in the justice sector institutions, and if this could be considered as a source for innovation. So I will kindly ask to answer the questions first to Gisele, then to Carlos, and then to Alex. So Gisele, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And I'd like to have some few words, to bring some few words, because it's very nice to see that after 10 years, we are still in the same agenda with many improvements. So the state of open data on these 10 years, and now after this pandemic period, this pandemic years, we have developed, and also we face more challenges. And I'd like to bring some points to our discussion today. And it's very, very nice to see that the organizers and the audience for this timely and topical event, it's very needed now, because we need to build strong partnerships between scientists, experts, and such global collaboration in order to facilitate the movement from ideas to policy. So in this chapter update, we can see that we had some achievements on the use of digitalization in order to respond to many challenges inside the justice sector, and outside too, thinking about how this data can be reused. Nevertheless, there must be a link between these achievements and political willingness to move forward with sufficient, equitable, and sustainable efforts that will help us to get back on track towards addressing the SDGs and global agendas such as open government. So we both face it. We're still facing the pandemics, and this bring humanitarian crisis, and this exposed the inequalities in sectors and regions around the world. The pandemic has also made evident the need for transformation guided by public policies based on data and evidence. I hope that this global collaboration and innovation can be considered indispensable to tackle the challenges we face and improve the lives of the most marginalized. So I'd like to stress the role of science and technology to play in addressing current and future challenges. And I highlight the need to ensure solutions such as open data that are locally applicable and locally generated. So Sandra, in this chapter update, she brings success stories and also solutions that must be shared so that we can benefit from the lessons we learned. The State of Open Data, RIHA, World Just Project, and so many other important players on this field can also play an important role in harnessing expertise, that identifying solutions and sharing them with local community and the country representatives. So I think that such networks that appeared recently is, in my opinion, the main success that we bring to the community in order to further develop open data in this field, in the crime and justice sectors. So these institutions, they are still in the beginning, some cases in some countries, they are still moving forward, opening their data. So these countries, some still in the beginning and others presenting some remarkable results, they all face the same challenges. So we should look how they are strengthening their data systems as a whole, because this requires attention to the infrastructure that facilitates the collection, storage, maintenance, governance, and distribution and use of data. So the barriers are many times related how to develop strategies to promote open data while ensuring privacy protections for personal information in a way that this can support global opportunities to harness data as a tool for socio-economic recovery. And how we can, in the justice sector, democratize data. So open data will make it public available upon release, supporting transparency and public decision making. So the main point, in my opinion, is that to develop a data governance policy that can clear outline process around privacy, ethics, trust, ownership, metadata availability, and public accountability. So governments will have a critical role to play in building open repositories for open data sharing, as well as ensuring that collected data is not inappropriately repurposed or weaponized. Thinking about the challenge that we have regarding fake news and some other misinformation. So it's also linked to artificial intelligence. So we see that.
Giselle, I think we are on time. Maybe you can just keep your remarks on artificial intelligence for your next participation.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's my pleasure to be here with you, with colleagues, and to congratulations for the chapter. And to answer your question, in general, I would like to say that the advantages of open data in general are not different in the justice sector than other sectors, but especially because the justice is the institution, part of justice are the institution addressed to preserve the rights, the guarantees, and the enforcement of law. I think that the first one would be to preserve the rule of law and strengthen democracy with opening the data to the public and to the citizen, to the different actors, external actors, because This openness, I think that it helps in the public scrutiny and fighting corruption, for instance, showing the different actors the activities that they are doing. So that means opening, transparency, and accountability. In addition, I think that this helps to improve the institution performance in the mission that they have for different institutions. It doesn't matter if we talk about the police or court or judiciary, prosecutors, or correction department, Ministry of Justice. That means that this openness helps to and accountability helps to improve the services, the activities that they do, because obviously the effectiveness, the justice protection, and the efficiency, if they are questioned or they are negative or not so positive results, that can have an impact. So that means also internally to improve, even within the court, when the statistics are open and you can't evaluate how is the different court, the different departments that are working on this, the different performance or activities that they have, it can also help to improve this, I would say, performance. In addition, this openness to the citizen, it can means trust, increase the trust in the justice sector institution. I think there is a big gap between the justice institution and court specifically and the citizen. So this increase of transparency, opening the data, and even the security that you see the police talked about, the Chicago police, it can help to be closer to the citizen. And in the same way, the citizen can understand better the justice institution and their activities, for instance, with the judicial decision, being closer. There is a talk this about data, about the information that can be used in different ways. Also applying, I will talk later about artificial intelligence. So the key here is also the access to justice. I think, in my opinion, that open data helps to increase and improve the access to justice for the different users. So that means when we talk about access to justice, we talk about normative legal protection, we talk about legal awareness, we talk about legal aid and counsel for the different person that needs to access to the justice, of course, adjudication and enforcement. So all these different perspectives and the activities that the different actors in justice sector do about the open data can help in one way or other to improve in this access to justice. And finally, I think you talk about innovation, and this is really important. Usually, it's said that with the data open, there are others who find the better ways to take advantage of this in the society. So that we are talking about open innovation, optimizing resources, and the possibility to be more part of the participation and collaboration using the data. At the end, in my opinion, we talk open justice, and the data is a tool to show what the institutions are doing and how the society can take advantage of this in order to achieve a more democratic, we could say, better sector, better, I could say, enforcement of law, access to justice. At the end is better justice in the different institutions, thanks to also to the innovation that obviously it requires resources. Then there are the other side of the activities, we will say, that are related to the different problems that we can find. So this is in general, I think that the most important advantage that we could think or talk, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Alex?
Thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you for the invitation to you and to E4D, and congratulations again on the chapter. I think it's a very important piece just in moving forward these conversations. I think to answer your question about the advantages of opening data in the justice sector, I think that we need to start by asking ourselves, what's the goal that we're trying to achieve? I think at the end of the day, I think open data is a tool, like many other tools that we have to advance access to justice, and in particular, people-centered justice. So what people-centered justice means is justice that it's really centered on the problems that people have, and that is backed by evidence. So then, as we can see, this is really at the core of what open justice data can provide, and by understanding, but by putting people at the center, that means that we need to understand when the problems start. It's not only about the justice institutions; it's about the problems of the people, the problems that people may have that are all different types. That they may be family problems, crime problems, administrative problems, and so on. And then once the people have those problems, the journeys that they follow, that some of them may end up in justice institutions, but not all of them. So, and in providing, in navigating those journeys, just people have to a certain extent, use services, right? And these services are information services, assistance services, adjudication services, and so on, throughout all the justice chain. And in each one of them, so what people want is certain characteristics of that system, right? I mean, we want that information systems are accessible, that are easy to use. We want that courts are accessible, that are efficient, timely, free of corruption. And I think in all of each one of these characteristics, open data can be an important tool to address many of the barriers that people are facing to, in the end, get access to justice. I think that you in your chapter, and now we have heard in the discussion by Carlos and Giselle, I think there are three elements that open justice data can provide, or that advantages that can provide to help people just in their justice journeys. I think one is making institutions or justice service providers more accountable. So I think that's one that was mentioned. More transparent, more accountable, really focusing on how well they can deliver their services and really just holding them into account. And then justice service practitioners as well, just being accountable to the work that they have to do and provide justice. Then we just heard about this, that obviously generates trust in citizens, and importantly, innovation. I think this is one of the key parts of open justice data, that it can really foster innovation in the sector at the end of the day, to provide better justice delivery or better service delivery. And I think this can be done at two levels. I think at the individual level. So one is through analysis, better ideas. How can we provide better services to people? And again, just starting through the justice journey, starting from help prevent justice problems to arise in the first place. But they can also help just throughout the justice journey, just providing better information, more tailored information, better tools for decision-making, segmentation, and so on. But also it can help at institutional level, thinking just how institutions and systems can improve. Open data is an important tool for understanding better the problems, understanding where the problems are, making the case for reforms, and also just helping in judicial policy and in general in service delivery.
Well, thank you so much, Alejandro. And I think the three of you mentioned the importance of understanding how open data can help increase access to justice, but through a people-centered approach, understanding their needs. Giselle mentioned that we should focus on marginalized groups. Carlos also mentioned all the services that should be provided. And Alex proposed us to understand the role of open data at the individual and institutional level. But I think that we all share the view that more data and more open data can help us narrow this gap and understand it better in first term, and second, as a goal to provide more access to justice by narrowing the justice gap. So let's go quickly to the second question, and then I will ask you just to speak for 5 minutes, no more, because we are running out of time. So we have provided a vision of the advantages of open up data, but we also face the reality that justice sector is sometimes reluctant to open up data. So which are, in your opinion and in your experience, the main barriers or challenges to open up judicial data? Let's just change the order so we can begin by Carlos now.
Thank you very much, Sandra. So this is the other side of the coin, I would say. And as you said, that the justice sector is very different in several things. So one of these is the culture and the characteristics that the justice has. And this is specifically one also thing to change related to the change management. So it's more difficult innovation, and even read some authors talk about semi-open data that you mentioned because of some specific characteristics of the data. So the first one is the implicit culture of the sector and the different characteristics. There are, in my opinion, they're important because thinking where is data coming from or how it is generated is the link, the lack of integration because between the open digital justice perspective. So that means digital transformation, and that means also open data, open justice that directly talking about transparency, accountability, is talking about collaboration, is talking about participation, and this should be something transversal. Thinking, especially, for instance, in the criminal chain from the police until the prison, and the lack of integration, different characteristics between the data. Even the usually we talk on open data projects, but not open data policy in the institution and on the through chain of the justice. And this is a difference because the integration with the policy would mean, I would say, I would talk about the need to think on the openness, even if we're talking about the digital, something like that. Because there are, as you said, also you talked about the framework needed, and that means also the justice or the digital justice ecosystem, even some for open or even for changes in the use of the systems and the data. So that means difficulties on the user of the data, and you talked also about the producers of the data. So we have limitation in both sides, and also Alejandro talked about it. I think that there are important also barriers related to the low levels of standardization and the preparation for data sharing and interoperability and openness. That means within the institution, is the different institution, and also it means directly to the to the external institution, to the chain, for instance, in the criminal justice that I mentioned before. And this is really important because standardization is one of the keys to information sharing and the change. And it is related to the different activity that the different institutions do. And it is also linked this to a broader thing, I would say a factor related to weaknesses on data and information management policies. When I talk about information or data management policies, in general, I'm talking about the different factors that the body of knowledge of data management has included. So that means data governance, data access, data quality, databases, records management, or interoperability. All these factors, according to the body of knowledge of the Data Management Institute, are within the data management, and these different factors and this approach to a global and transversal perspective are important limitation when talking about the open data. Even talking about when we talk about privacy or the different factors that we or rights that we have to preserve when the data is open requires an effort to for instance, for anonymization or for publication, and the automatization of the system, so the communication of the data sharing and the standardization would facilitate this, even if the effort is before. There are other components that is related to the different powers of the state or branches of the state, because we are talking about collaboration, about a chain of different actors. That means that even if there is a separation of powers, the different powers has to collaborate. In the case of justice, there are the judiciary, and there are also the Ministry of Justice, for instance, that are executive and judiciary branches, and it complicates the governance. Even for the data sharing, that then we could think on the openness of the data, because the signification of the standardization can't requires also links between the different perspectives that the different institutions have on the specific matter that they are working. So I think that there is a lack of understanding of the harmonization between the specific elements within the justice. That means, for instance, talking about independence of the judiciary, it doesn't mean that accountability or transparency are contrary. So that means that sometimes are misunderstood, and it requires I would say, I don't know if knowledge about these characteristics related to the openness, because it is possible to be accountable at the same time to be independent. And the lack of resources and knowledge, it's an important factor, in my opinion, from the concepts until the tools and the resources, policies needed to that would mean also within the sector. Again, in the other side, for the user that understand how to use and how to work in the data for this openness. Because one important thing, in my opinion, that this really is linked to the data management, one of the characteristics is the quality of the data. So this is really important to talk not only on open data, that this data has to be trust. We can trust on this data, how has been collected, how has been prepared, and that means different components related also to the quality, because to evaluate or to be open or to do the different activities related to the data or with the data, it requires also that this data we can be trusted above it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Alejandro.
Thank you. Yeah.
Perdón.
Go ahead. Okay. Yeah. So I think I will say that there are 5 challenges to open data in the justice sector. I think the first challenge is a challenge of approach. And I think this is not only about data, I think, but this is more broadly about the justice systems. I think justice systems are structured mainly around institutions and not necessarily around people. And that obviously manifests in the data that justice institutions and the justice sector collect. So what that means is that, I mean, we don't necessarily, we talk about opening up data, but part of the challenge is that sometimes we are not measuring the right things that we want to measure. So if data is to be used for advancing policy, for making the cases for reform, for advancing people-centered justice, we need to ask ourselves whether are we measuring the right things? Are we measuring the right outcomes? So, or are we simply going to open up data that may not be helpful at all to design better policies to advance access to justice? So I think this is at the core. So collecting the right data, it's a broader issue than open data, but it's collecting the right data, collecting or developing the right indicators in the right formats, and indicators, again, that are people-centered and that are usable by institutions to make progress. So I think the first challenge is approach. I think the second challenge is a technical challenge. So, and I think just Carlos has talked about some of these challenges. Sandra, you also talk about them. They have to do with the quality of the data, the privacy of the data. There are in some cases sensitive information that we need to take into account, just how to anonymize that whenever we're thinking about making it public. Just the issue that data changes over time as well. So just how do we keep this current? The interoperability, just standardized processes and so on, which are real challenges, just if we're thinking about making data that it's useful just for advancing access to justice. So I think that's the second challenge is a technical challenge. The third challenge, which I think you mentioned this as well, which is legal, political, cultural, and I think there are a lot of different aspects there that could be included in this challenge. So it's, I think, the lack of legal frameworks, resistance to change. I think in general, just the justice sector is a sector that is resistance to be held accountable, to change, to innovate, and that's a challenge. I think Carlos mentioned something that it's important. Sometimes the argument that because of independence, then the justice sector is not accountable, and there are very different concepts, and the justice sector has to be held accountable as well. The issue of collaboration is an important one. In many cases, or in general, if we think about access to justice and how to promote or advance access to justice, in general, the justice sector is very fragmented. And it's difficult to coordinate among different institutions, not only on data, but in general in judicial policy. So the courts just are there like the emergency room, but if we're thinking about more of the public health or the justice policy, then there are a lot of different institutions. Many of them are actually not even in the justice sector, and coordination is an issue that needs to be address mandates and so on. So I think that's the third challenge, legal, political, cultural. The fourth one, I think that Sandra, you mentioned that at the beginning, which is capacity. I think just in general, this is expensive, just not only developing but also maintaining that, just keeping it current and so on. And in general, just the justice sector as compared to other sectors usually has very limited resources. So then that is definitely a challenge, even though we know that it can bring benefits, but it's still a constraint that many judicial systems and justice sectors face. Just both in terms of financing, but also in terms of human resources, how to use this information and so on. So it's not something that people may know. And I think the fifth one that I think you mentioned as well, Sandra, which is the demand side. And I think that's important. Sometimes just either civil society, private sector, and so on may not necessarily just be as savvy or use information that it's available to co-create or to inform justice policies. I think that's a challenge in many countries, that they are not as sophisticated, and that creates a challenge in itself for open data, because we know that at the end of the day, if there is no demand, then there are arguments of why are we just spending so much money just in opening this data if nobody's using it. So it's also just a challenge that needs to be confronted when thinking about it.
Thank you so much, Giselle.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you, Carlos and Alejandro, because I totally agree with the points you bring here. And I only like to stress that we are talking about a different context, because many of us has a history on opening government on the executive branches. So the judicial branch faces a very interesting reality, because it is reactive. So how we can develop collaboration and participation with a power that has this characteristic, that's not so historically open to have some other actors in order to build a new governance. So we are, in the end of the day, talking about how we can work together in a context maybe sometimes very complicated, that some countries faces, that the judiciary is a very active political actor. So we are facing now some attacks to our democracy, and the judicial power that is a very relevant political actor in this moment, in this context. And this brings the point that this power should be so accountable as any other power that we have in a open state. So in my opinion, the governance should address this point, and also should address the point that we have inequalities. So open data should not deepen these gaps, these inequalities that we are facing. So the ecosystem should be developed and should be strengthened. And some context is such a huge challenge to have these actors, these stakeholders, all in the same step in order to open data, consume this data, and transform the data in economical and in social transformation. I think in brief, these are my points. Thank you.
Thank you, Giselle. Well, very interesting to listen to all of you, and I think we have very similar views on the barriers. So going to my next question, I think I will make a little addition based on what I heard from you, and I would propose to reflect on which are, in your opinion, the best strategies to overcome all these barriers, because it's much easier to identify the problems, but we also need to come up with some strategies to advance. And following the third question, do you think the use of artificial intelligence could help create some of the solutions we need, or that we are not there in the stage or in the maturity of judiciaries just to introduce this as a solution? But if you can also comment about the strategies to overcome the barriers, would be great. So let's begin with Alex now, and then Giselle, and then Carlos, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. You're right. It's easy to point at the problems, but it's harder to think about solutions, and even harder to try to implement solutions. So let me just try to answer your question. I think to the points that I just mentioned, and then just touch a little bit on the issue that you mentioned about artificial intelligence. So I think to the different points that I mentioned, and obviously understanding that it's very easy just to come up with solutions, but really these are quite hard. So on the approach, I think in general, I mean, it's really hard to change just how systems work, you know, just because in general, systems have been built around institutions, not necessarily around people. At the same time, it's not that we're thinking about a complete transformation. I think it's more about trying to identify just within the current infrastructure of the justice system is how can we make services, justice services, more people-centered? And how can we think about the things that we would like to improve and the data that we will need in order to deliver those services across the justice chain? And start developing those data, piloting the data, developing those indicators. I think this is a joint effort of the community in general, because it's challenging, and start testing that, start seeing, just using those indicators. There are some examples just of jurisdictions that are already trying indicators and producing data in very open ways on issues that people that people may care more about. The issues that are technical, I think they are. I think the community is making progress, probably not as fast as we would like, but there are some interesting initiatives just on the characteristics of some of the data and how to overcome, providing some guidelines and principles and so on, just on how to overcome some of the technical aspects of this. But obviously, it's quite challenging to do that. It's quite challenging to find the resources to address the coordination issues, the political issues, and so on to even do that. I think importantly, it's to make the case. I think, and this is something that we as community need to do, just how I mean, to a certain extent, is how can open data, I mean, just really just make the case, how can open data just make, on one hand, just provide better services to people, but also can benefit the practitioners that are working and the entire ecosystem working on a day-to-day of issues, because in many cases, just this is seen as a burden. Just it's like I need to collect data and then I need to just publish it and so on, just in addition of my work. But it's really just on how this can indeed support the work of people, and is really investing in this for have better outcomes in the future, and not only for the people but also for practitioners. I mean that the work to a certain extent could be easier. I think in general, there's I mean, artificial intelligence to a certain extent is a way in this direction, because what it does is essentially is making use of this information just in many or using this information to help in many of the decision-making processes across the justice chain. So then it's simply not about opening the data, but it's also about how to use this data, and artificial intelligence is a very good example of how this can be done through the use of computers and so on. I think in general, moving in this direction, and this is also addressing this issue of making the case, can help provide or improve services across the justice chain. And I think what I mean is the following. So thinking about first from prevention, just before any justiciable problem may happen, artificial intelligence can help with crime prevention. This is probably just the most useful or mentioned case of prevention of use of technology to prevent problems. But there can also be used in other types of administrative problems, land, debt, and so on. We know that a lot of the problems that people face, for example, is government benefits. So artificial intelligence can help indeed just to prevent this problem, identify where the loopholes are, and prevent these problems from happening in the first place. But not only that, just when people experience problems, just it can help as well, both I think at the individual and at the systemic level. I think at the individual, just it can help provide better information, better assistance, and also importantly, just in the resolution process. I think a big challenge that in general justice system have is just that many cases do not necessarily need to go to court. So we know that people may use a lot of different routes, and in many cases there are a lot of different avenues, and artificial intelligence can help indeed suggest alternative routes at different stages of the process to make just the system more overall more efficient, and people receive better outcomes. In criminal justice, it can support investigations. We know that there are a lot of technologies that are already doing that. And also just in just thinking about just the trials and the prosecution, bails, I think artificial intelligence in general has been provided useful to help just the practitioners in making these decisions. I don't think they're going to substitute practitioners, but I think it's an important tool for helping them to come up with better decisions in cases in which there is a lot of information that they have to evaluate. And more broadly, just in cases of systems, just as we were mentioning before, just they can help just improve systems, provide better policies and so on. So obviously there are challenges. Just I think just probably there are three big ones: data that we were just mentioning, the challenges related to data. I think another one is ethical and all the different issues that in employing these technologies, we need to be conscious about fundamental rights, about not generating biases or perpetuating biases or discrimination, just ensuring transparency, control of the user, just right to appeal, and so on. And I think the last one is understanding again, just, and this is important, that it's a tool, like many other tools, just it's a tool and needs to be used in combination with others. It's not simply the panacea that is going to solve all the problems.
Thank you. Giselle, may I kindly ask Giselle and Carlos to talk for 4 minutes, so we have 10 minutes for discussions later. Thank you.
Great. I will try to do my best. So regarding the point of artificial intelligence and other digital technologies, I think that, of course, these have a great potential opportunities, but also potential to exacerbate the inequalities that we have in our society. It may, some cases, introduce some unintended consequence. So I very concerned about this, because for instance, in Brazil has made many efforts to reduce discriminatory practice. However, we have a structural inequality here and a violence that affects certain groups in our society, like Afro-Brazilians, indigenous peoples, women, and land defenders, and so on. So we have to develop a digital agenda that should take this into account building infrastructure, promoting data and information reusing, and designing robust governance to build the trust and growth. And some very few points about recommendations. I should consider these ones regarding feedbacks, the channels in order to make the dialogue. So this initiative should connect these efforts to indicators and performance milestones and goals, and also have the channels to receive appropriate feedbacks in open data portals or public hearings. And all this should be public, and also this should feed the process inside the institutions. So how we can build co-creation inside the justice sector? We may have this debate, I think, as soon as possible. So just to have very brief points to our conversation.
Thank you, Giselle. Carlos?
Thank you very much, Sandra. So I think that there are some interesting things in the future with artificial intelligence, but I think that I agree with Alejandro and Giselle in some of the points that they said. Artificial intelligence models can make prediction, can explain, and can recommend. So three capabilities different that could be applicable to the different fields that we talk, for instance, for the legal awareness in the access to justice. So that means that it could be, it could help to improve the access to the legal justice information. It could help citizen or person to find easier way to solve legal problems and increase efficiency. That means within the different processes that the different institutions in the justice chain use. But, and I think also concerning this in this field, artificial intelligence models are built or systems in a different way than the usual application of some software engineering. The first thing is the data. And the data has to be the right data with a sensitiveness very important. So the justice system and the European Union, the CPEC, talked about this. The system in justice, some of them are considered high risk and a very sensitive system. That means that applying artificial intelligence, even with chatbots, can be I would say can solve problems and can create others. So how do you know if a robot, a chatbot, for instance, gives some recommendation and these recommendations are wrong because we are talking about probabilities? So that is a complicated scenario. I think that there is needed some risk management frameworks that the regulation in the countries, even within the justice, has to be very protective in this way. It can help the access to the justice, but it is also very important to know that there is and especially related to open data, there is no AI, artificial intelligence, without data. And we could talk about open big data to applying artificial intelligence, to trust in the data. But it is very important that it has to be in the beginning very careful and to understand that it requires efforts and legal protection of the rights, of all the rights. So the ethics is a very, very important thing in this kind of application. It doesn't matter if it's even as I said, the chatbots, it doesn't matter because it can reproduce bias, it can affect, it can help, of course, but it is important to understand what is that and have enough maturity for adoption of these technologies. So if there are challenges and to the open data adoption, there are, in my opinion, much more bigger for the artificial intelligence adoption, while preserving all the rights and the ethically protection of the person in the justice field. So about the strategies, I wanted to finish your question about the strategies to open the data. I think that Alejandro said very well about the people or centered people at the need that the institution need to do this transformation. And one of these is the external policies addressed to participate and to use. But internally, I think I would like to highlight my first intervention about this link about the openness and the digital. So the data, that means this digital transformation, the openness, the transparency, the accountability with the data should be since the beginning and should be included on this. And of course, also Giselle talked about it. It requires resources, it requires investment, because the efforts, sometimes we have to say that the justice and especially courts sometimes are, the investment is not the same that in other fields. So in my opinion, so these strategies could help, of course, taking in mind the need of open the data.
Well, thank you. I think we have now some time for questions. I see one in the chat. I ask all the participants that if you have more questions, you can write them down so we can answer them and we create a sort of conversation among us. So the first question is from Gabriel Mercado. And it's a question to all of us. He says, one aspect mentioned as a barrier by Alejandro is the fact that publishing institutions often fail to see cost-benefit relationship between publishing judicial data, which is a costly process, and the actual benefits that this could bring. So the question is, how can we help justice institutions understand and assume their role in any prospective data value chains? So maybe just 1 minute each for the answer. And please, if you have some more questions.
I will try to answer this. I think to me, this is a big challenge, and I think in general, parties, this has to be a very specific answer, in the sense that, I mean, we know all the benefits about opening data and so on, and how they can help just in general. I mean, we have been discussing that, but I think the challenge is just how specific indicators, how specific data sets are going to help and for what. And I think it's important to make the case. And I think in general, in the justice community, we haven't answered fully that question. How can we use the information that is publicly available already, or that could be publicly available, to advance public policy? How these particular indicators can help us, for what? And if they don't help us, what would be the information that we will require to advance what? And I think in general, just being in a lot of conversations about indicators and so on, it is a question that hasn't been fully answered. In general, a lot of the discussion is we need more data, we need more either open data or producing more data, but we also need to answer the question of how the current data or the data that could be produced really helps us to advance this. First, public policy, I think that's important. And second, just the practitioners themselves, because it's expensive to collect this type of information and so on. So how it can help also the justice system and the practitioners to do their work better. So I think I think those 2 points are important. I think the third one, which is a more challenging one, is tying or generating incentives tied to some of these indicators or data. But that's a little bit more challenging because that requires, I mean, it can generate perverse incentives and so on. But I think at the minimum is really just highlight the benefits of the specific types of data.
Giselle, Carlos, would like to make some comments?
Yes, thank you, Sandra. I think I agree with Alejandro. I think that at the end is how this can help to build better justice. So that means how to serve better to the citizen. But related to the question, I wanted also to say that this is important to understand that other institutions understand why the justice sector is important. So I mean, for instance, we think of budget or the different assignation that they have the justice field. So this investment are important. So the justice sector, unfortunately, we had some in the health because of the COVID, and also the COVID been I would say have strengthened the advance in the digital government or digital justice in this case, and that can be an important value. Thinking of what Alessandro said about the indicator, about the information or the data that they have, and how to take advantage of this, opening it. But I think that there are different factors that are needed to support also the justice institution in these activities, because as we said also before, that require a value that sometimes, an effort that sometimes are not depending only from the justice institution.
Yes.
So we have go ahead, Giselle, if you would like to make some remarks.
Oh, thank you for the question. And just to add a point, because we also has a challenge inside this, because the judicial sector is very heterogeneous, because we cannot use the same case. I was thinking, show the low-hanging fruits. Oh, so we have very nice data and put them on the web and look how they are used by society. But they are very distinct situation. For instance, we have here in Brazil a very strong open data portal on the election results and election data. So it's very disaggregated, very high quality, and is very used for journalists and to track the elections as a whole. But you can also use the same argument, the same points to other judicial branches. So we should talk about how this institution can be improved inside and outside, in this relation with civil society organizations, media, and practitioners as a whole. So we should build categories in order to see how these inside and outside movements can be improved by using open government data.
Thank you, Giselle. There's one more question that I will ask you, only one of you, to answer, because we are running out of time. So it says that law enforcement tends to be non-transparent in their use of data. What is the greatest point of leverage for transparency by law enforcement, e.g. procurement? Any of you would like to comment on this?
I will try just very quickly. So,
Okay.
I think I mean, this is a challenge. I think that in general, the use of data, it's how just law enforcement are using first is whether they indeed can publish data, and the second one is how they are using data and be transparent about how they are using data. I think that, I mean, this really depends on the position just on law enforcement. I think there are both positive and negative incentives. I think on the negative incentives, obviously the incentives are either, the two large incentives are either public opinion or funds, just to incentivize just the opening of information and how in general just the law enforcement officers are indeed using this. But there are also just positive incentives, I think, as well, and which just the law enforcement officers and police and so on can use this as an opportunity for show their work. I think one of the challenges that in many cases they face is to build trust, and in general, publishing this type of information could help just in that regard. So I think it's goes on both directions. I think it really depends just more on just the attitude or the incentives that law enforcement officers may have.
Well, thank you. We have one comment from Sara Castillo de Costa Rica, from Costa Rica. So she's trying to answer my questions about the strategy on how we're going to overcome the barriers, and she's talking about the experience of the judiciary in Costa Rica. She says, in our experience, there are three things that are helping. First, to establish a framework for operators, protocols, manuals, directrices. Two, information about what the open data is and its importance. And three, showing cases of good use and establishing links with data users that create demands. So thank you for your contribution, Sara. So we are almost at the end of the presentation, and I would like to thank you very much for your remarks. And I think as the update on the chapter is still to be published, I will take some of your ideas to rethink some of the points that I have remarked. The first is about that open data on crime and justice remains as a driving force for innovation and for accessing more justice. So this is something that I think we all think it is still valuable. Then I think we need to understand how the justice ecosystem works, and that it is not mature enough, and we have to, and this is justice sector institutions are still not understanding and working towards the publication of more open data, and still there is a lot to be done for the organizations from civil society organizations to use data. So we have to strategize on how to make this ecosystem more mature and think about governance of this ecosystem. And related to the artificial intelligence in the justice sector, it has a lot of potential as a tool for deepening access to justice in the different levels that Carlos mentioned, but also there are some ethical issues and very, very important ethical issues to consider when we are proposing the use of this artificial intelligence and other machine learning or automatic tools that we would like to introduce. So these are the conclusions of this very productive roundtable. And as I said, I will review all your comments very carefully to include some of them in the update of the chapter. And thank you to all the participants to be here, and to D4D for putting together the roundtable, and of course to the panelists for very interesting and thoughtful remarks. So good morning, good afternoon. We will just, well, the chapter is published. I can write down, maybe Ana Sofia, I can ask you to write down the link to the chapter. I don't have it open now. And the update will be available soon. So I think with this we can finish because we are on time. Thank you so much and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.